Good afternoon. I hope you all enjoyed lunch. It's kind of a weird speaking spot right after lunch because I'm usually ready for a nap. The introducer gave us tiny little fib. He said I would try to bring things back to publishing. I've got a little thing I have to say at the start. I know nothing about publishing. I'm the dumbest person in the room here, and it's been good for me. It's been really great just to listen to you guys talk and learn a lot about this industry from the other experts in the room. I am not an expert. I was trying to bring my presentation back to publishing as much as I could, and every time I tried, I realized I don't know what I'm talking about. So I'm going to stick to what I do know, and I hope as we go through this case study and I talk about how data science has changed the film industry, that will inspire you and give you ideas of how you can use things in your work. And you guys are all much smarter than I am, and you probably can see how to apply these better than I could if I was in your industry. And if I can't inspire you, I hope I'm at least entertaining for 30 minutes, and I'll make sure I stick to schedule. So I'm working for Gower Street Analytics. We're an amazing company that's been around for about 2 years now, and as I go through this, I'm going to come up with a lot of incredible and unbelievable claims about what we can do. And you're all going to look at me like I'm crazy or lying or am overselling my company. And by the end of it, the talk, you will see that you're mostly right and that you can't believe anything I say. But I might have convinced you on one or two things. As he said, I came from NBC Universal International, and I was director of data science over film, over television, and over home entertainment. You watch TV and film at home, so you'd think these are all the same. From a business perspective, these aren't the same at all. These are completely different business lines. I left to start Gower Street Analytics with a couple of my colleagues because we thought this sort of data science stuff works better as an independent company rather than inside the industry. And kind of the plan here, this works. So kind of the plan is I know you guys probably know about as much, maybe a little bit more about the film industry than I know about publishing. So I kind of want to walk you guys through what the process is like for a couple studios today and how almost every studio was about 5 years ago. And then the next 10 minutes, maybe a bit longer, I want to talk about how this process has changed and how the introduction of data science has changed how the business is making decisions. And finally, I want to talk a little bit about how we got there and how we came up with the ability to do all these amazing things I'm going to claim we can do. And the best part about that is it's last, which leaves me no time to tell you anything of significance, which is great because I don't want to share my trade secrets. So the film industry, if you're a film studio, if you're the head of distribution, you kind of have two main jobs, and one is to pick talent, and the other is to pick release dates for your movies. And the process for how the studio works is you start at this green light process. It's a very top-level thing. And either you or one of your analysts or a producer is going to acquire a piece of content. They're going to see it at a film festival, or someone will approach you and say, we want to make this film. And as soon as this starts off, you will, because you're the head of distribution, you'll call up your analyst and say, hey, how much is this film going to be worth it? I'm the head, just to put this a little more concrete, we'll pretend that I'm the head of Universal Pictures. I'm the head of distribution at Universal Pictures. And an analyst has called me about this small title that we want to release internationally. It's a non-English speaking title. We're going to release it across Europe and across the Middle East. They call me up. They say they want to release this film. I call up my analyst. My analyst will go off like busy data bunnies trying to come up with data for this film. They're looking at the cast, the talent, the synopsis, they're looking at the genre, they're looking at all the different rights on which territory and which country has which rights. We're going to have distribution rights across Europe. We don't have rights in English-speaking territories. They say that's okay because it's not an English language film. And finally, they try to come up with a lifetime gross box office number. And the official business process for this is to guess, because it's an industry where nobody knows anything. And no one really knows if Fantastic Beast is going to do incredibly well, and no one knows if it's going to flop. So you guess, and you put that number back, and all the guesses come back to the head of distribution. And you go, okay, these are good guesses. Jurassic Park is going to make $12 billion. Perfect. I'll sign off on it. And we've greenlit the film, and then it enters production. And production, you go to sleep. You don't care about production because you're head of distribution. You have no control. So you pick a product, you don't get to see anything about it until it comes back a little later. And we see that it's now in post-production and we've got to release this puppy. So now suddenly you have this piece of content you approved 6 months ago, you gave it some number that was a guess, and now you've got to figure out how are we going to release it? What dates are we going to release it? And this is your most important decision, because picking the release date can change. I mean, it's not going to change Star Wars into an Inferno, but it could change a £100 million Star Wars release in the UK to an £80 million Star Wars release in the UK. And that 20% margin that's a big difference. And if you're too close to that Fantastic Beast date, and you're Warner Brothers, you don't want this competition going in. On these big films, this is kind of easy, but on a slate of 100 smaller films all over the world, this is no longer an easy decision. And how this will work, you'll pick a date, you kind of go with it, you call up your territory managers, they say they're behind it, and then you kick off your pre-release marketing. And then the marketing teams gather around, and they sit around these big tables, and they start coming up with comps for this film. They say, all right, this is sort of like that one French film about the Iranian Revolution. Yeah, how much did that one do in its opening weekend? It made 300,000. Okay, so we think this one can make 300,000. Give me another competitive title. And they'll continue coming up with these competitive titles, and that's going to judge how much money they think it can make. This is a new guess off of the first Greenlight guess they said they can do. They're going to using these comparable titles to figure out how much money it's going to make, but also how it's going to behave and who they should be marketing. So they'll break down this number. They think it should make 300,000 in its opening weekend. They think 80% of that is going to come from millennials, and because the other films mostly came from millennials. So all right, how do we adjust our marketing to target millennials? Finally, when that's done, we're getting closer to release. The film's actually on the market. It's the Monday before the Friday release. In the UK, we release on Friday. In some other territories, we release on a Thursday or Wednesday. But it's that first Monday before release. You've now got your salespeople on the phone with exhibition, the actual cinema owners. And they're calling each other up. And they're saying, hey, I've got this great non-English speaking title. I want it to play everywhere in Germany. People are going to love it. And the exhibitor's going, I've got 5 other films, and I've got Star Wars and Fantastic Beast, and you want to put your little thing on here? I don't know if we can do something. All right, we're going to give you 60% rentals. You get 60% of the grosses. All right, maybe I can give you 2 screens. And they'll go back and forth, and since your salespeople are also distributing a big slate, you've got this one title opening, but you also have your holdovers. This is a long process of everyone arguing with each other on Monday morning until they come up with rapes. And this is the process of how the film industry kind of works on how films get from production into cinemas and your audience. But all of this kind of goes up the wall. Because say if we've got this non-English title, but we also are watching The Revenant, and we're going, all right, what's going to happen to this French title if we move The Revenant forward by 2 weeks in Germany and Brazil? How's that going to affect? Are we going to lose money on this? And suddenly, everyone goes berserk. All those data bunnies that kicked off in the Greenlight process, they all come back in. And they go, all right, what was our original estimate? We came up with 12 billion. It's only going to make 300,000. Oh gosh. All right, how did we come up with that in the first place? What are we actually going to do in Germany? What's going to happen in Brazil? What are the other things going on in Brazil? Are kids on holidays in Brazil? Are there universities in Brazil? What are the university students in Brazil? Are there any football games going on at that time? Are there any other sporting events? Is there anything on TV? Who's in the film? It's got a Brazilian actor. That's got to count for Brazil. Does it have any German cast? They'll continue asking these questions, and it's an inherently a data-driven process because you're coming up with all this data. You'll even be watching who's responding on Twitter and on Facebook to your trailers. So you have a lot of information, but this is a very slow, painful process. And one of the sneaky things here is I kept saying at every point, we're coming up with a prediction. But at no point in the industry is anyone going back to check our predictions and see how accurate they were. In fact, even that word accurate is sneaky. So if you have a background in statistics and you hear the word accuracy, say I have this test that can tell if you have a disease with 99% accuracy, that's not really that useful. because if that disease is only in 0.5% of the population, that test is going to have a lot of false positives. But this isn't even that, because this is more complicated. We're not trying to predict if a film is going to succeed or not. It's not a binary choice. We're trying to say it's going to make 300,000. It's going to make 12 million. And once you're talking about accuracy, you're losing your mathematical rigor here. The actual metric you should be looking at is the error. And nobody tracks the errors of their predictions. Nobody wants to see how wrong they are. Of course, I don't want to know how wrong I am. I get my predictions right all the time, right? Yeah. So we, at Gower Street, one of the other things, the side projects we do is we have this industry game. We invite experts from Hollywood, from independent distributors in the UK and in Germany and in France. Sometimes they're cinema owners, sometimes they're marketing people, and we ask them to make predictions on how much a film is going to make on its opening weekend, the day before it releases. This is a really easy job. Everything I'm talking about here happens 6 months to a year before release. This is just a weekend out. The best human experts average 80% error. Yeah, I hear a couple people snickering because they're just really bad, but 80% error is really good. These are massive businesses run on 80% error, and I can guarantee, these are the best guys. I guarantee you, if I gave you a slate of 12 films and came to you the weekend before its release and asked you, how much is it going to do? Your error would not be in 80%. Your error would be in the hundreds or 200%. But this is incredibly insightful for the industry because no one even knows how wrong they are. They say, oh, it's too hard to predict, and they never try to optimize it. And this is, I said we have 3 things to talk about. I think we're doing okay on time. And this is how things are in the non-data-driven world of the film industry. And the work we've done in Gower Street and at NBC Universal beforehand starts to change this process. But once you try to become make data-driven decisions, especially on that key decision you can make, the release date, we immediately run into this problem of we don't actually have any data. If I'm the head of Universal Pictures and I'm releasing Jurassic Park, I find out after it released that it made over $1 billion worldwide because I collected that money in. I never know who actually buys a ticket to my movie. I don't know who walks into the cinema. I don't know who buys it on DVD. All of my relationship with my customers is controlled by someone else. Someone mentioned in the panel before, we don't get those credit card transactions, so we don't see how these things affect our business. And we're in the same boat for every single product all the time. We release a trailer, we don't know if that trailer actually got more people, more butts in the chairs to see this film, or if it got more DVDs sold or more downloads on Netflix until so much later. And I mentioned Netflix, that's a great example because they never share data with us. I don't know if you guys get any data from your resellers. We get nothing. So what we do have, and this quickly becomes more of a statistical problem, what we do have is we have historical information of how much every film has made per day going back to 2005. For economic purposes, it's not really useful if you're doing any modeling to go back before the last recession because consumer habits change significantly. But we took a lot of historical data and we started to build a simulation that would just model demand. What is the demand to go see the cinema on a particular day? And we would break this down by demographics. And this model is not just so we see what has happened in the past, but so we can start asking the model questions about what happens when you have a school holiday. How much does that actually affect the demand, the audience demand for children's movies? Or what happens if you have a video game release? How much is that actually going to affect the demand for World of Warcraft in China? But just getting the demand is only half the battle. The other battle, and I mentioned when we go back and when the marketing team sits and tries to figure out how are we going to hit our number, they're coming up with a lot of comparable titles to see what does this behave like. This is another human-driven process, and they use this to match a film into its demographic breakdown. We've introduced a lot of machine learning based on what we know of how films have behaved versus our demand forecast going back in the past on how films are going to behave if they're doing better when children are in high demand. And we use this to automate that competitive title process, comparable title process, so that we can then have a computer start matching titles into these different demographic categories. This third layer we have is competitive modeling. So we see when two films are going after that same demographic, if you've got two, I'm not going to use, I mentioned Fantastic Beasts and Star Wars before, I'm not going to use that one. I'm going to do last Star Wars, when Star Wars was playing against Daddy's Home in the US. If you've got this massive title and this much smaller title, is Daddy's Home, is this audience all being taken away by Star Wars, or does it find a new audience of all these people who just really don't want to see Star Wars but are going to the cinema on Christmas Day in the US anyway? Yes, it was the latter. And we combine these three of these things into an interactive simulation that's all based on that one question. When the head of distribution used to ask me at Universal Pictures, what would happen if we changed the revenant from 2 dates behind our planned date, we would ask this model, and we would change that whole conversation of, all right, this is going to take us 2 weeks to come up with the answer. By the time we do, all the other films around it have changed, and this is a useless pie-in-the-sky research exercise to something, all right, 2 minutes, we can run it in the meeting. We now have it right on paper. How much is this? We can see this weekend is going to do $10,000 more than that weekend in Brazil. Why is it doing that? Oh, I see there's a school holiday there, so we're capturing a bigger audience. All right, what other films can we move in to take advantage of that? And we've changed a whole level of the conversation just because we can answer those questions so much more quickly and with so much more information behind it. So our dating decisions, it's kind of a fuzzy graph for you guys. I hope you all can see it. And this is actually one we did for The Revenant in particular. Can now break down week by week and show us 52 weeks out of the year. In the beginning of the year, there's a pretty big range, but all the numbers are pretty high. This is kind of the high and low, because our models don't give one number. It gives a probability. We think 80% likely to make this, because it turns out we still can't predict how much people are going to like a film. We only know if there's going to be people that are willing to see it. I think there's a lot of people who are going to be willing to see it here, and there's going to be a lot of people willing to see this film in September. In the middle, in the summer holidays, not so much. So that was the process of how things started and how we changed this. We took all the data we had. We used the best mathematics and statistical properties we can come up with to change that one main business decision into something that's illuminated by the data around it. And we changed the process, so instead of it taking 2 weeks, we can now come up with an answer in a few minutes. And the other thing that I'll mention in it a bit, we were taking all of our predictions all along the process, but never checking how well those predictions are. We were never counting our error. But now we have an automated process. Every time we have a prediction, if you put a prediction in the system, you get a prediction out. We record that, and we can automatically show our error. So we have a baseline we can prove on. I promised I was going to talk a little bit about how we did those three things I talked about. And our philosophy with all of this is that we're trying to not replace our head of distribution, but we want to enhance his intuition. So our 2 bits there, since we don't have data on our actual audience, we have 2 main machine learning tasks. One we call feature engineering, which is where we're trying to extract information from our historical data. I mentioned we're trying to match the film to its demographics profile. We never actually get the audience demographics. We have to extract that and infer that from other places. And this is part of our feature engineering. And for this, we use some arcane mathematical tools called topological data analysis. And the other part where we try to enhance our executive's intuition is on giving him a lot of machine learning tools. So when he's sitting there trying to select, or his whole team is trying to select comps off the top of our head, we instead give them a tool where they can select comps. It's suggesting comps to them. They don't have to think so much. It's selecting better comps, more relevant comparable titles. It's giving them tools like something we call probabilistic graphical models that helps relate all the different variables in a way that make sense to them, but a computer can also predict on. And we're powering all this with a lot of Bayesian statistics and machine learning algorithms, so that all of this is making statistical sense and coming out with a coherent model. Oh dear, I'm missing something very important. I wanted to tell you how good our errors are coming out on the other side. And after doing, oh, it's on there, it's on the bottom. So on the other side for the UK, we're able to beat our human experts almost all of the time. We can take our average error down to 25% from 80%, which is a very significant improvement. Now this does mean that we are very wrong on some films. In fact, if you give me any one film, if we're talking about any one film, and it's a film that you know very well, you're probably going to beat our model. You give me a slate of 10 films, I'm going to be better than you across that whole slate. That's how these statistics work. But the cool thing about this, once you have this model, and we started with this one question of how to pick the best release dates, lots of other questions start coming up. One like our overall release strategy. For instance, there's a film a few years when I was back at NBC Universal before we started Gower Street, Les Miserables, which was a Christmas Day release in the US. And intuition was that this should be a holiday title in the UK as well. The model picked up a whole new release window after the new year in the second week of January. This was a fight we had in the studio that, this was a huge business decision that no one believed on. We released it after the new year. It broke records. And another question that's starting to come up, it's been coming up for a while, that the industry is thinking about is how do we actually adjust our release windows? Because we know more and more consumers are not going to the cinema. They're watching it at home. Their home entertainment systems are getting more and more complex. We know that people are going to our video-on-demand platforms. And in some cases, in France, by law, we have to keep that window. In other places, we can adjust that window as much as we want. And now that we have a model that we can start to interact with, we can start using it to answer these questions of what is the most optimal window. What is that window right now? I really don't know yet. In fact, this is the end of my talk, so I'm going to stop talking and thank you very much and stick around for any questions. Thank you. Get that question a lot. We don't try to influence the creative process. In fact, if you ask the model backwards, all right, I want a film that's going to make $10 million on the third week of August. It would, because of all of the feature engineering that goes with it, it would say, all right, you need to make me a film that has these features. This film should be comparable to, yeah, exactly. Presumably a huge factor. We've not even tried to measure it because we can't predict the weather. And these models are working 6 to 9 months out. In some cases, for instance, in Russia, the first weekend of spring is going to destroy the box office market. That risk is sort of baked into the model where it knows everything around a possible springtime in Russia has a lot of high risk. That doesn't tell you a whole lot except don't release a film in March or April because it might really suck. We can't predict what that weekend's going to be. We don't try. It's kind of picked up by the historical information because it knows there's some risk in there, so you'll see wider probability ranges. But other effects beyond weather, in the US there's kind of an election going on right now. I actually promised someone I wouldn't talk about it. Now I'm talking about it. That's something our model wouldn't pick up. And the reason why is kind of twofold. One, because some of these events only happen every 4 years, and so you end up with a sample size of 1, which is not very good. And the other is to resist the temptation to just throw everything you have at the model. And then instead of having a model that's actually fit for purpose and able to ask a question, it's just kind of a hodgepodge of everything you think might come out, and then the model can't really read any signal or noise. So we have a live simulation that our clients subscribe to and gain access to. Every time a release date change is announced, it immediately reruns. Every time a trailer hits, it will immediately rerun. So again, back to the US election, if you watch Nate Silver, 538, he's a statistical modeler. If you watch his election model, you can see every time a poll comes in, his model will update. Ours works the same way. Every time something new hits it, it refreshes.
To track with each other, or are there any particular?
They don't. If you look at them on a long year period, over 10 years, you'll see them all trading places overall, but they aren't very correlated at all. Universal Pictures, they changed heads a couple of years ago, and you're just now starting to see the effect of their new head, Jeff Shell. Their old head, Adam Ferguson, liked a lot of mid-range titles. So you wouldn't see them do a lot of big superhero movies or anything else because they like to do these mid-range films. Disney, of course, likes lots of big films all the time, and their whole release cycle is driven completely different. Disney sees themselves primarily as a manufacturing company, and the box office market is just to drive the toy lines. Whereas someone like Universal, Warner Brothers sees themselves as movie companies. And then Warner's also has deals with other people, so they have their own thing. So even the studios kind of segregate themselves into 6 different flavors, and then you have the independents coming up alongside that. That's a pretty diverse set of clients. We work for all of your big Hollywood majors to varying levels of intimacy. So Fox, Warner's, Disney, Universal, Lionsgate, which isn't one of the big 6, Paramount, and I'm missing one, Sony. Sorry. I shouldn't miss Sony because they're actually one of our best ones. We also work with, and I left this part completely out of here, we work with exhibition, with cinema owners, because they won't be interested in seeing how much a film is going to do, but they also see it for different reasons, because for them, knowing that Star Wars is going to be huge means they need a lot of staff. So this is another part where we solved a release date problem, and because of that, we are also getting a problem of staffing levels in people's buildings. So when a client has access to our systems, they're kind of built into a sandbox. They get our vanilla model, and then they can start uploading data and their own dates to it. Now, the way the system works, there's only one person in our company who holds encryption keys to see everyone's data, and that person doesn't talk to clients. So there's never a possibility that we'll see Sony's thinking about moving this date over here. That could never leak out because that person would never talk. He's not supposed to look, and if he does, he won't ever reach to a client. So that's all encrypted in their own sandbox, and people can't leak out. On the legal side, in the U.S., that would be illegal. That would violate antitrust. There'd be collusion in the market, and there'd be a lawsuit. Yes, and some of that doesn't correlate as much as you would think. Twitter is mostly useless, but I don't tell clients that. I'll tell you guys that, but it doesn't help. When we are looking at trailer hits, we're not looking at the total magnitude of hits. We're looking at how much is that changing from day to day. And the way we treat that is that's a signal to how much people are actually interested in this film, which is the bit that's most difficult to predict. So it's actually a pretty weak signal, but it's a non-trivial signal. It helps us tell, are people actually going to like this? Success on that side, coming from the social data, would be Batman versus Superman, which had a great release and a very steep drop. And our model was able to predict that very steep drop. And that signal was coming, we think it was coming from the social media data, which would include trailers. We are a very idiosyncratic company. We'll have your standard machine learning toolkit on Python. We also use a functional programming language called Racket, which you wouldn't see a lot of people use. That's something we do, and we're just weird. Yes, until you've mentioned it. Yeah. That's something we probably should talk about after, see if there's any way we can help that process. There's a lot of pitfalls. There's a lot of things you might jump into that will come out and bite you. In the film industry, we kind of understand these things. A lot of this, just how our product looks and feels, is driven by our understanding of how distributors work with exhibition and how distributors work with their producers and their bosses. And it's a piece of enterprise software, so you gotta pitch it in such a way that works for them. I might have a high-level understanding of how publishing works on the day-to-day business side when people are actually using the tool. I don't know how it looks, so we would consider that more when somebody else can help inform us of the right choices to make at each of those choices. Anything else? Thank you very much.